Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti. Siamo molto contenti di avere qui Rostyslav Semkiv. Rostyslav è uno scrittore, saggista, traduttore, critico letterario, è direttore della casa editrice Smokoskyp e insegna alla facoltà di lettere dell'Università di Kyiv Mohyla. Siamo molto contenti di averlo qui con noi per parlare di quello che è un po' il ruolo non solo della società civile ucraina in questo conflitto, ma anche e soprattutto di quello che è l'elemento, diciamo, culturale, cioè della classe culturale, quindi di artisti, scrittori, musicisti, registi, che hanno assunto un ruolo molto attivo in queste ultime settimane. La conversazione sarà in inglese e quindi ora facciamo il passaggio e spero che la troverete altrettanto interessante di quanto io trovi, insomma, gli articoli di Rostislav. Grazie. Hi, Rostislav. Thank you so
Hi.
much for being with us.
Hello. Good evening. Yes.
We really appreciate you making time for us at this time, really. As I was saying in my introduction, we're really happy to have you here because what's going on in Ukraine, the war that we're seeing is such a tectonic shift in the history of Europe. This is something that will really has already impacted the history of the whole continent and will do so for many years to come. And we think that it's very important to follow not just what's happening every day in terms of the news and what's happening where during the war, but also, to understand the historical and cultural context in order to have a better understanding of these events. This is why we're so happy to have you here, and this is why we're inviting not only journalists or military experts, but we're always having on writers, historians, academics that can help us understand Ukraine much better, because unfortunately Ukraine is not very well known and understood in many Western European countries, and that has to change. The point I would like to start from is the role of civil society, and especially of Ukrainian artists and writers and so on in the present war. We've seen, so many images of, writers, musicians, film directors, sometimes taking arms, but even when not taking arms, being really actively involved in the war effort. And these images have been very inspiring for many, and for some in some European countries, have even been a bit surprising. I know it's not surprising to Ukrainians, but the perception of what's going on is not always the same. So what I would like to ask you is, how would you best describe the role that the Ukrainian culture and civil society has played over the last few years and is playing right now in this war?
Thank you, Ludovico. As far as I can understand this situation, yes, this is like the civic society has to behave, has to work. It works like one organism where everyone has something or finds something for himself or herself to work on. So yes, we have some writers or singers, I don't know, boxers, yes, sportsmen who are now in front trenches, who joined the army or the territorial defense. But we also has many people which help, like volunteers. Either they help like musicians, or they join and support them logistic lines. They can work with fundraising initiatives. It is also very important. They work as also warriors of informational war, because we have informational war. We have this large wave of fakes. You see now that Russian propaganda, they are trying to subvert, they are trying to fake all the information that appears in they try to say something that is black, that it is white. So it is also a huge propaganda machine, not only the fighting machine in Russia. And so it is very important to make the fight also in these all fields, in logistics, in fundraising, in all of these directions. And so as far as I can understand, this is the core sense of democracy. That many people, they have different views, they have different feelings and different thoughts about the situation in general. But when the situation in peacetime, but when the war comes, then they all unite just to support each other. And this is precisely what we can see now. We can see different people which are in their place, yes, professional soldiers, and our army fights so well because we have enough of professional soldiers on their places who are quite keen on fighting. But also we have volunteers who support, and this is not so important where do they support, but they just do something for the victory. They just do efforts. Yes, we can name, for example, Serhiy Zhadan, our poet, yes, who is a volunteer, and he is still in his native Kharkiv, though the city is bombed, and so there are constant fighting on the outskirts of the city, but he's still there, and he brings different things which are needed for which are needed by soldiers in the front lines, and it is his work. It is how he understands the necessity of his own work. I know another poetess, yes, less known as Serhiy Zhadan, for example, Elizaveta Zharikova, who is in territorial defense in Kyiv. So many people find their place in this struggle and try to support each other. But you know what is quite important? It's not the thing that was born yesterday or a month ago. This mutual support was born already in 2004, when there was so-called Orange Revolution. And there was a general uprising, the first Maidan, first gathering, first manifestations to overthrow this pro-Russian leader. And then it was again in 2014 during Dignity Revolution. And then it goes on since that time for several years, because we have war since the annexation of Crimea and the invasion into Donbass. The war continues, and all of this time, people acted together just to support the army, to support the society. Though, yes, now it is very intensified. Now it is days of extreme intensification of this mutual support. And so, in fact, I'm proud with this, with my co-citizens, because they truly illustrate how it should be, how a true democratic society should react for their outer invasion and should unite to support each other in this drive for victory.
Thank you for that. And actually, one point you touched upon that I think was very important to underscore is how, you know, in peacetime, the Ukrainian, I mean, Ukraine hasn't had real peacetime for many years now. But even, you know, before this escalation in the war, the Ukrainian political scene is quite vibrant. There are so many different parties with different ideas, and they, you know, very often very fiercely criticize one another, as it's supposed to be in a democracy. And the quite, you know, remarkable thing is how, you know, from the beginning of the war there was complete unity, and people with very different ideas and different perceptions of how the country should be run were managed to unite against this threat to the existence of the country itself.
Yes, it's definitely so. Again, we had democratic elections, and of course, quite a fierce fight between different parties, between two main opponents. Today's President Zelensky and the former President Poroshenko, and many people which were for Poroshenko, they were very skeptical towards Zelensky. But now I know a lot of people who ceased to be so skeptical and who really support nowadays Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in his effort to fight, in his effort to resist this war, this occupation. And yes, I think this core trait of the democracy. So we have different discussions, we have different thoughts in the days of peace, but now we have to unite, and this time no more quarrels between parties, no more I don't know, this informational war inside the society when opponents they try to blame each other or to criticize each other. No, just now it is more the society is more united than any one of us could imagine before. It's really so. We are surprised. Yes, we're surprised that of this unity. Also, as we are very positively surprised of the successes of our army because that was, a big deal of propaganda. Okay, with the strength and power of Russian army, we now see that their army is not so sophisticated, strong as someone believed before. Yes, it's also because of their all world support, the support with the weapon, because we know one thing, it's the moral spirits which are high, and another is the possibilities to fight. Yes, we feel this support and the possibility to fight, and so we are quite optimistic about the future. Okay, I think that yes, of course, we have tragedies we should not have, but we are quite optimistic as when we speak about the successes of our army. We do have successes there.
I think that, and that's like the other aspect that I wanted to ask you about. I think that this unity on the side of the Ukrainian society, despite the many differences that you mentioned, also shows what is a understanding on the Ukrainian side that this is not just in quote, of course, this is not only a war that the Kremlin is waging against Ukraine as a state or against the Ukrainian government. It is a war against Ukrainian people, and in that sense, it is a war against the identity and the culture itself of Ukraine. We've seen, some of the articles that were posted, and so what's the ideology behind this? It's an ideology that denies the existence of a Ukrainian national identity, of a Ukrainian culture, of Ukrainian people, and in a way, I think this is an aspect of this war that has become, and that people in Western Europe are starting to understand only now. Like initially, it was very much looked at as only like a geopolitical game or something like that, which everyone in Ukraine and to be honest, most people in the rest of Eastern Europe and the Baltics have been saying for years. It's not about that. It's much deeper and it's much more complex than that. It's about it's about something else, and we're seeing this now. People are starting to understand this. And I would like, if you could, to try and explain it further for us how this is a war, not just against Ukraine as a state, but it's a war against Ukrainian as a people and against their identity.
Yes, I also agree. There is a question of cultural difference that is not seen, is not imagined from the north. They are just they don't just see us as a separate state, as a independent state, as the separate culture. I guess it is quite okay to make a parallel with those words or sayings which Hitler told in regards to Austria. Yes, they speak just the same language, so they are Germans. It is a territory which belongs to us, and we can annex them. This is the same logic, because yes, the left bank of Dnipro River, the left bank Ukraine, the part of Ukraine, the south of Ukraine, especially in big cities, we have citizens which speak two languages, Ukrainian and Russian. Majority of people to the right bank of Dnipro River, they do speak Ukrainian. So we have people which speak Russian, but they do not understand Russia as their own state. Yes, so they understand themselves Ukrainians, but they speak Russian. The legacies of Soviet Union, of this Soviet era, so they were educated in Russian, so they speak Russian, but they understand themselves as Ukrainians. And this is the core point which is not understood in Moscow, because their logic is very straightforward. Yes, they speak Russian, then they are Russians, and so we can come there and annex them and make these territories a part of Russia. And then what is surprise, they come and they didn't see any people which are trying to meet them as liberators, which are trying to comfort them, yes, which are trying to which are having great urge to reunite with Russia. They are surprised because they are not treated. Yes, as liberators. They are treated as occupiers. They are treated like enemies, and we see that the most very fierce fights were in those cities like Kharkiv or even in Mykolaiv. Yes, in those cities which have enough of Russian-speaking population. But so it is a difference. They may be Russian-speaking, but they are Ukrainians, and they understand themselves as something else, and especially in difference with this totalitarian. Today we understand it is totalitarian Putin's regime. It is yes. Ukrainian culture is another culture. Ukrainian literature is a separate literature since very old times, and we have these differences. But very important difference is political difference, because even just now, and Ukrainians have been trying to establish their democratic state at least since the beginning of the 20th century. Since 100 years of this different struggle, and it was really established in 1917, and then lost. Yes, but from the very beginning, it is the project of democratic state. And in Russia, we have, of course, this authoritarian or totalitarian today rule. And so Ukrainians, in their overwhelming majority, do not want to have anything common with this horrific regime, which now which now is showing its nature. Because for a long time they were trying to say something to cover, yes, their in fact true state of this regime. And now we all see that it is based on force, it is based on repression, and this way, of course, no one is going to support or unite or something like this.
Thank you for that. I think the parallel that you drew with the late 1930s, could be extended not only in terms of on the linguistic ground that you're mentioning, but also that the language was very similar in the sense that when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded
Poland.
Countries of Poland and the Baltics and Finland and
something like historical lands. Yes, so they can say, "Oh, these are our historical lands. We can take them." So yes, you're right.
Yeah. And also, but what I was going to is the fact that there was this language about these are not actual real countries. These are not legitimate countries. These are not legitimate governments. They shouldn't exist. And for example, during the invasion of Finland, the Soviet idea was all the Finnish workers and proletarians will rise up against their own government and fight on our side. And that was completely, of course, misguided and absurd to think. And there are interesting parallels in that sense. I would like to slightly change the subject to something that may sound a bit specific, but I think it's and strange, but I think it's very relevant, which is the subject of satire and irony, which is something you have written extensively about. You basically wrote a lot about satire and irony as a intrinsic and really important thread in the Ukrainian cultural and literary tradition. And this is very interesting, but I also think it's interesting because we can see that today, like even in these really dark days when you can see some of the most horrific and harrowing images. If you just need to go on Ukrainian social media or on Telegram channels and so on to see, you see all of that, but you also see this very strong, ironic and satirical content that is mostly directed at making fun, at poking fun at the aggressor. And I don't think many people in the West are necessarily aware of it, mostly because this content is in Ukrainian, and you need to have someone who helps you understand to actually, be able to understand it. Can you help us understand this tradition and how it's playing a role today in bolstering the Ukrainian resistance?
Yes, you said that it is something completely different, the question of laughter, of humor, but it is not different. Quite to the contrary. That it is almost no laughter in totalitarian regimes. They suppress laughter because they repress laughter. When Stalin came to his full power in the 30s, he and his regime repressed and physically eliminated almost all writers which were writing humoristic and satirical pieces. We had in Ukraine in the beginning, and then the middle of the 20th century, we had very strong humoristic writer Ostap Vyshnya. So he spent almost 10 years in Siberia, and he almost died because of his humor, because of his satire. So totalitarian regimes, they are afraid of laughter, because laughter it is also quite a powerful weapon in dismantling of their in this in the criticism. Satire is a criticism. So that's why totalitarian societies with long totalitarian or authoritarian histories, they lack this humoristic tradition. And to the contrary, when you have liberal societies or societies which are democratic in their essence, they can laugh. They can laugh with different sorts of humor, with satire, with sarcasm, with irony. They can be ironic, because it is very dangerous to be ironic in totalitarian world, in totalitarian society. Just remember George Orwell, yes, and his 1984. It's very suspicious to be ironic, because if you're ironic, then you think something else than you tell, and it's very suspicious. So you have this, like in Orwell, double speak crime. So you have something to hide from the regime, and the regime tries to understand you and to make you thinking straightforward. So as far as Ukraine has this very long democratic tradition, it has a tradition of democratic laughter. In our history, it's something like, I don't remember now, perhaps 17th century. We have very interesting historical event. It is then depicted and transformed in the legend or something like this. So Ukrainian Cossacks, Ukrainian these fighters against different invaders since 15 and then till the end of 18th century, they wrote a letter to Turkish Sultan, to Turkish king, yes, who sent first he sent them the ultimatum, yes, the so the letter, and with this letter, Turkish Sultan said that so you Cossacks, you should so you should take me as your king. You should be subdued. You should be so you should you should come to my under my power. And they wrote him a humoristic, satirical, sarcastic letter with the answer that they were not going to his power. They were not going to conform his demands. They are going to fight. In fact, this episode with Russian missile cruiser at the beginning of nowadays war, this fact with when big Russian missile cruiser demands that several people of several soldiers on this Snake Island, this Medina Island, capitulate, and then they just with one phrase answer them. It is something like those Cossacks who answered this mighty Turkish Sultan that in this 17th century. So they are free inside. Only a person who is free inside can laugh. And so it is a correlation between democracy and laughter, democracy and humor. And that's why, as we see this democratic tradition since, I don't know, ancient Greece till ancient Rome, till the whole Europe, and even in the most dark ages, there was a tradition of laughter. And in Ukraine, we have the tradition of laughter quite strong. So it's then perhaps now I could one by one tell about different writers which were quite important, quite influential of the whole this tradition of humor. That's why we have many nowadays satirical memes, different comics from our side, yes, which are depicting the enemy as they, for example, they are looting those houses. Yes, they are looting villages and towns in the northeastern Ukraine, where they now left to Belarus and Russia. So they looted these houses, and so we have a great many of different pictures of different things which are satirizing them as they are carrying those I don't know microwave machines or coffee makers. So these are trophies of this great army. Yes, so we have a great many of this stuff nowadays. And for me, as for the researcher of this phenomena of humor, it is first of all the trait of inner freedom and the trait of will to life, this optimistic perspective, because humor, in fact, humor, it is also about the feeling of life, about the feeling of life in its essence. And totalitarianism and absence of humor, it is about death. It is about will to death and will to inflict death. So it's not only the fight between democracy and totalitarianism. It's also the fight of humor and no humor, of life and death. Okay.
I think that's such a powerful way of describing it, and in a way, I think what you touched on is very it's very true, because laughter is spontaneous. You can't force people to laugh, and you can't decide to laugh or not. It's a spontaneous reaction. That's why it's one of the first thing that it gets banned under dictatorship, because of course to them it's scary, the fact that people can spontaneously react to something. You touched on it, and I don't know if you want to expand on that. You did mention a few that there are a few writers that you think would be important to know to understand this tradition. I know this would take forever if we went through it, but if you just could mention some so that our audience can, then I can put them in the description of the video and people can research them and maybe read them.
Okay, of course, the first one we should mention, because let's leave aside the very ancient literature since centuries, but we should mention first of all Ivan Kotlяревский with his Aeneid. That was a fashion during 17th and 18th centuries to make parodies on Virgil's Aeneid. Yes, so it's Aeneid and classical text. This Aeneid was learned in all schools during the 17th, 18th centuries in Latin. And so there was a fashion to make parodies in France, in Germany, in Austria, and also in Ukraine. So in the end of the 18th century, Ivan Kotlяревский wrote in Ukrainian the parody to Virgil's Aeneid, and that was the first great work in modern Ukrainian language, because we had old Ukrainian and then modern Ukrainian. So our modern Ukrainian language and modern Ukrainian literature starts from the parody onto classical work of Roman literature, and it is very important text, and it influenced much onto the other texts. Then, so that's one to say. Then another also is Taras Shevchenko. Taras Shevchenko is our greatest romantic poet, and as every romantic poet, as Byron or as Heine, he had satirical poems. And he was imprisoned for 10 years. Taras Shevchenko was imprisoned for 10 years. Not imprisoned, but he was made a soldier, which is was the same in that time. So he lost his freedom for 10 years, especially because of his satirical poems. I believe they are translated into different languages. So the next one to mention is Ivan Franko. Is also very important writer in Ukrainian, and he had, besides many other his writings, he had these short satirical poems. And Lesa Ukrainka had much irony in her writings also. In the 20th century, I already mentioned Ostap Vyshnya. He's quite. He was extremely popular. So factories stopped their work because people were urging to listen to his radio broadcastings when he read his writings. And in the end of the 19th century, we already have, in the end of the 20th century, we already have many of them. Yes, Ivan, Yuri Andrukhovich, Yuri Venichuk. So we have a great many of different humoristic authors. These are to name the main of them, but you should also take into account that since the beginning of the 18th century, we were in total control of Russian culture, and they are, as a totalitarian culture or authoritarian culture, they constantly repressed humor and in general laughter in general. They repressed in their own culture. Okay, we can also name their humorists and satirics which were repressed, and they were trying to repress the Ukrainian humor as well. Yes, I already mentioned at the beginning of 30th in Ukraine there was a very influential satirical magazine. Satirical magazine Parrots, and almost all its editorial board was killed, was executed by Stalin's regime. So it was also not also the humoristic tradition in Ukraine, but also the constant repression of this imperial center to this tradition.
Yeah, that was very interesting, and I took notes of all the names, and they're going to be available in the description of the video. I think something else that actually I was reading in one of your articles is how some of, even within the Russian literature, within their tradition, many of the writers, well, first of all, one has to say that a lot of writers that are considered Russian, well, they're not always, maybe they wrote in Russian, but it's highly debatable sometimes what their national identity would be. But also that within that tradition, many of the writers that brought irony had something to do with Ukraine at some point.
Yes, of course. It is another line. Many of writers which dealt with humor and satire in Russian literature, they were from Ukraine. They were of Ukrainian origin, and that means of this democratic culture. They were from Odessa, like Ilf and Petrov and Katayev, Babel. They were from Kyiv, as Bulgakov, for example. So they were of Ukrainian origin. And for me, that means, first of all, another context, another understanding, another outlook, more free outlook. That's also the powerful influence which Ukrainian democratic context had onto Russian literature since Gogol, of course, because Gogol came to Russia, came to Petersburg, to Moscow with Ukrainian background, and his first topics, his first writings, they are all set in Ukraine. So first of his collection of short stories, they are set in Ukraine, and only in the end of his life he turned to Russian topics, to Russian background. So he also brought his humor from this Ukrainian background.
Thank you.
Okay, I can make a list of authors and send to you. You can then make.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yes,
that would be amazing. I'm sure. I mean, it's incredibly interesting to me, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting to our audience as well. Because unfortunately, well, our audience is mainly Italian. Unfortunately, they're not authors that are widely read in Italy, and it's something that would be great if it changed. So the more we can spread the awareness and the knowledge about this, the better. And from this line, I want to move to something that is a bit darker, which is what we're seeing in these days. We've seen some of the most horrific and harrowing images, and the thing about this war is also that it's happening at a time where we almost see things happening, I mean, not in real time, but almost. Like, we have there is very small time distance between when things happen and when we in around the world get to see them, and there is so much coverage. We see so many horrific images, and these images are going to stay with us for many years, and they're going to stay with the Ukrainian memory for many years. They're going to affect how people in Ukraine remember this year, and they're going to affect the way Ukrainian artists and writers will tell the story and will tell their story in the future. So I know it's a difficult, I'm not asking you to predict the future, of course, but what do you feel is the impact of the horror of this war? What do you think it will be on the Ukrainian art and culture?
Of course, art should commemorate the tragedies, and it will commemorate the tragedies. The art will show also history, but art also will prevent from losing these things. So art will commemorate these things, and art will make people remember. But these things, it is almost impossible that it still happens. Something like Bucha tragedy or Mariupol, it still happens in the beginning of the 21st century. But we should understand that these things, they are international in the understanding of this horror. It is not only Ukrainian art should react, world's art should react, world's civilization should react, and not only to Mariupol or Bucha, also to Syrian Aleppo and other things, yes, to something that happened in Sarajevo before. So we have just okay, let's believe these are the last convulsions of this totalitarian monster, and I don't mean just now only Russia, but yes, Russia, of course, but not only Russia, but these shadows of totalitarian regimes, this understanding that if you are strong, then you can go and subdue the weak. So this understanding should be destroyed, and art should, in all different cultures, in all national cultures, should do this work, should promote this understanding that it is impossible to take this rule of a strong one as a perspective. No, we have to change this, and we have to underline them, to stress the impossibility of impossibility and the absence of future in this for this totalitarian rule. And yes, tragedies should be remembered, and they will be remembered. And we already have, yes, we have humoristic, satirical memes, but we also have different paintings already, and different texts, yes, and films, documentaries, first of all, yes, about these things. Yes, art will react, but what is even perhaps more important, that after these all fights, after this war, we just believe, we strongly believe in this, that after this war, art will be possible. Yes, addressed in your questions. You addressed something that Theodor Adorno said. Yes, there is no art after Auschwitz, and we have the same question: is there art after Mariupol? And we can answer that yes, there is art after Mariupol. There is art because this fight is for freedom, and when freedom wins, then it makes possible for art to exist. Because again, in totalitarian societies, they don't have art. It is not art, it is propaganda. So it is different. And so the art will exist after our victory, after the victory of all civilized world, because this victory in this war will be the victory of all civilized world against darkness, against obscurantism and all those horrible things.
Thank you, Rostislav. Thank you so much for coming to our show. We really appreciate it, and we hope we'll have you in the future. I'm sure there are more subjects that we can talk about and discuss about. I think this was incredibly interesting for me, and I think it will be really insightful for the audience as well.
Thank you, Ludovico, for your interest and for this invitation. It was very interesting for me, and I guess it is very important. You make very important thing, and so I wish you all the best and good perspectives to your initiatives.
Thank you, and we send you all our solidarity in these days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.